So I'll be talking about openness. Openness in general, openness in terms of data, and openness in terms of development, application, software, open source. So ang goal ko is for us to really understand what it is to be open. Na when we hear the word open or when we use the word open, hindi lang siya, a lot of people like buzzwords, blockchain, AI. People use buzzwords a lot. It's marketable, it's hip. Pero what I want is when you hear the word open, when you use the word open, alam talaga natin yung ibig sabihin nung open na yun. Ano yung ibig sabihin ng pagiging bukas? That is the end of this presentation. Hopefully, yun yung, kung meron man kayong makuha dito, at least yun. Ano ba talaga yung ibig sabihin ng pagiging bukas? So, about me, I was introduced last time. Thanks, Kitch, for introducing me again today. A short, intro about myself. My name is Ben. I consider myself a geospatial generalist, an open staff advocate, and a data activist / maptivist. As I've mentioned before, and also sa introduction ko, I work. I'd like to think that I work at the intersections of the openness development, data, and the geospatial fields. What that means is I usually, I wear a lot of hats. I have a lot of roles that I play. And I like that because I think I've had holistic approach pagdating sa mga bagay-bagay. So I currently serve three roles primarily. I have my own consultancy, BNHR, where I provide open spatial and data solutions to people. I serve as a data training lead for the Open Knowledge Foundation. It's a global foundation whose aim is to create a free, fair, and open future by, ensuring people know how to work with data, people know what openness is, and things like that. And of course, I'm also the CTO for SmartCT. So, kilala nyo naman kami sa SmartCT. We're the first tech nonprofit in the Philippines. We're not focusing solely on tech. We're actually focusing on creating a movement. Creating an environment, creating isang Pilipinas kung saan nagbago na yung way by which we think about smart cities and smart city development, na hindi na lang puro high tech stuff. So that's always been the call. That's always been the north star kumbaga ng smart city. As I mentioned, also I'm also the data training lead for OKFN, the Open Knowledge Foundation. What we do there is we teach, we build, and we organize. We teach people how to become data literate, how to create how to become more skilled in terms of data. We'll talk more about data literacy sa third day. We build applications, we build software, we build networks. The open definition is curated by the Open Knowledge Foundation. The Open Database License, Open Knowledge Foundation din yung nag-start. And yung SICAN, if you know SICAN, the Open Data Portal, Open Source Data Portal, it's also the Open Knowledge Foundation na isa sa mga nagsusupport nun, and some of the developers are members of the network. And also we organize the community for a better, better and more open future. And lastly, as I mentioned before, I also have my own consulting gig. I've worked with several organizations, private, public, NGOs, corporations, mostly on open data and open source. So I provide training, support, and consulting. I also am a QGIS certifying organization. Ibig sabihin, I can provide official QGIS certificates, such as this one sa baba. And yeah, I also am a QGIS sustaining member. I help support QGIS financially. So I support it from sa mga nakukuha ko sa mga engagements ko na yan. So you can say that most things in my life already revolve around openness, open source, and open data. So when talking about it, you might hear a bit of passion or even a hint of disappointment, maybe anger at how things are. Because it's been a part of me for a while now. I've been advocating for this, and I've been working with people who advocate for this for quite some time now. So that's enough about me. What about you? You remember may pinasend ako na pre-event survey before the start of this, and I was looking at the answers kanina, and it was nice. It's good to get to know people, even though kung tayo sana ay nasa face to face, I would ask you these questions, at the event itself, ask you to raise your hands, ask you to to para meron tayong konting back and forth. But alas, the most na pwede natin is right now is the poll and yung pre-event survey, maybe later on sa Q&A. But yeah, I asked these questions because I wanted to include them. So I plan to include them in the presentation way beforehand. First, I ask you what is data, or ano yung data para sa inyo. So there's a simple word cloud of all your answers. Hindi ko na lininis, so medyo madumi yung may mga bagay na medyo madumi pa. But those are basically what you said when I ask you kung ano yung data para sa inyo. Information, fact, analysis, statistics, collection of information, decision making. So these are the things that para sa inyo, ano nga ba yung data or ano yung datos? Hindi ko naman what I've managed to learn over the course of the years of working in this space is data means different things to different people, diba? Hindi lang iisa. Hindi lang iisa rin yung natin sa data. Yung medyo technical definition ko is data is a model of the real world. Ang data andyan yan as a representation ng mga tunay na bagay, mga bagay na nangyari. So kung meron kang data about yung pinaka siguro lagi narinig natin ngayon, COVID statistics, number of active cases, number of recoveries, that's a representation. That's an actual representation of what's happening in the Philippines or what's happening in your country. So data represents the real world, and that's very powerful. If you can represent as a city planner, as a programmer, even as a normal person, if you can represent the real world accurately, then you can extract insight. You can create conclusions na mas accurate, na mas tama, na mas mag-work. I also ask about machine-readable data. Mamaya paspasadaan rin natin ng konti ito. So I ask you, I said machine-readable data is data that's that can easily be extracted, processed, and analyzed by a computer. Yung example na binigay ko is, if I have that data or file format, dapat automatically kaya kong magkuha ng sum or average. Diba? Something like that. So a lot of you answered spreadsheet, databases, CSVs, and then some answered PDF documents. And I'm pretty sure yung mga sumagot ng JSON, mostly developers and IT people yon. Hindi ganon ka sikat si Jason when to non-dev people. But mamaya titingnan natin kung ano na siya and machine readable ba. Alin ba dito yung actual na machine readable stuff, and alin dito yung hindi. Yan. Fair warning pala, the presentation might take a while. Medyo malaki-laki to and mahaba-haba, because openness is a very wide and varied discipline, and ayoko namang na maging diluted o yung discussion natin. So diba, at sabi ko nga, at the end of the day, I want us to understand what openness is. So I'll discuss about openness, open data, and open source, as well as kung itong mga bagay na to na tinanong ko or tinanong ko sa inyo before. And then I also ask about openness. Kung nagtanong ako about data, I also ask about openness. And ganun din, most of you talked about transparency, pagiging bukas, accessibility, lack of secrecy, restrictions. And these are These are great definitions actually of openness, and it's something that we can build on, something that we can utilize as foundation natin when we talk about openness. And parang wala naman ako nakitang mali or very skewed na definition ng openness dun sa mga pinakita natin or mga sinagot natin. Mostly naman, it dealt with transparency, with access, and those are some of the characteristics or some of the components of what it means to be open. And then I ask you about open data. Well, I'll discuss more about this later. Pero we'll debunk some of these things, some of these so-called quote-unquote myths about open data. Kaya ako tinanong na open data, do you believe there's open data in the Philippines, and do you believe na there's open government or the open governance in the Philippines? Because a lot of you answered open data will result in open government. More than half actually answered yung na for them, they've either heard that or they believe that themselves. And what I can say right now is kung ganun lang sana kadali yung buhay, masaya tayong lahat ngayon. Hindi natin kailangan gawin to. But unfortunately, hindi ganun kasimple. It's not just about open government. It's not just about opening your data, and at the same time, opening your data will not immediately lead you to or allow you to become an open government. Para dun sa mga sumagot ng yes, they believe there's open data, probably may sumagot sa inyo na yes, I believe in open data, but I don't think there's open government in the Philippines. And then yung vice versa naman, I don't believe there's open data, but I believe that there's open government. So medyo weird yung na yun. But yeah, hopefully mamaya I'll talk about this more, and during the presentation itself makikita natin kung bakit hindi ganun kadali or hindi lang open data yung consideration natin for open government. Pati na rin yung iba dito, open data needs highly technical skills and applications. Not really. Mamaya magpapakita rin tayo ng examples of how you don't need highly technical skills and applications to work with data. And you don't even need to spend money to actually work with data so long as data is out there. Diba? Doon pumapasok yung ating mga open source software, yung mga ating free and open source applications, na kaya natin ngayong magtrabaho with data without really the need to spend too much. And again, that's in line with the call always of SmartCT na hindi lang high-tech, hindi lang dapat yung mga highly technical people yung nagtatrabaho with data. And everyone should have the capacity or the opportunity at least to work with data. I'll also talk, about open data being opposed to, to privacy and security. It's not. Mamaya titingnan natin that there are valid concerns about data privacy and data security. Even in open source, it's the same thing. But these concerns, even though they're valid, mayroong way to approach them so that they do not become, problematic. Kasi valid naman talaga yung concerns ng mga tao about privacy and security sa open data. And quite a few of you, around 1/3 of you, believe that as well. Na there's something there that we need to look at. And all data should be open. People will be able to edit. We'll talk about that more later on. And then I also asked you kung ano yung mga narinig nyo na rason na kung bakit hindi nagbubukas ng data yung mga tao, yung mga organizations. An overwhelming majority, 60 out of 72, that's a lot. That's 5 out of every 6 of you answered na people might misuse or misinterpret the data. Kaya ang naririnig nila usually na rason kung bakit hindi binubuksan yung data. And that, again, that's a valid concern. But again, there are ways to, minimize that. And there are ways to, even make sure that doesn't happen. And in fact, mamaya makikita natin, open data actually makes sure na hindi ito mangyayari. Because if the data is open, everyone can see it, everyone can use it. If someone uses it or misuses it, if someone misinterprets it, gumawa siya ng viral Facebook post about sa data nyo, you can always debunk it with the same data that they used. Diba? Kung bukas yung data, people will be able to audit kung ano man yung mali or ano man yung misrepresentation na ginamit. Diba? There's this saying, diba? Parang data or it didn't happen. Diba? Show me the data. Then I'll believe you. And that's something na I think sometimes people think counterproductive. I-open ko yung data ko, baka gamitin nila sa mali. It's actually the contrary. If you open your data, you protect yourself more from misuse and misrepresentation. Kasi andyan na yung data eh. Pag sinabi nilang na gumawa sila ng kwento tungkol sa inyo, tungkol sa LGU nyo, tungkol sa whatever, and then you just show them, okay, this is the actual data that's happening. This is the metadata behind it. If you actually look at the data, makikita nyo that it's not the story that it's telling. A lot, 46 din yung nagsabi nyo might create negative stories. But diba, they also might create positive stories. And it's an entire it's an entire thing in of itself na if you open your data, yes, you are kumbaga opening yourself to possible negative stories, but you're also opening yourself to possible positive stories. And most of the time, though, the pros really outweigh the cons when you talk about opening your data. And then most of this other stuff I'll also talk about later on. People don't have the skills or software to use the data. That is not true. Makikita natin mamaya. There's a lot of there's a lot of open source solutions that you can use. There's a lot of stuff that you can use. And some people just need the data to use it. I mean, you shouldn't have the monopoly. Yun yung sinasabi ko lagi, especially with national government agencies. May turfing minsan. I mean, I'll be honest, may turfing minsan when it comes to data, when it comes to analysis, when it comes to research. Ba't nyo ginagawa yan? Ba't nyo kinukuha yung data na yan? Ba't nyo ginagawa yung research na yan? Are you mandated to do it? At the end of the day, if you open the data and it's publicly funded, people are, it's the mandate of the people to use it. Pera ng taong bayan yung ginamit dun eh. And it's very problematic when national government agencies don't release data because yung reason nila ay wala namang skills tsaka software yung mga tao. But who's to say? Some people might be better data analysts than you guys. So we'll talk more about this mamaya sa discussion proper. Then paborito ko your experiences with open data, and another overwhelming majority pinag-send muna ng request sa head ng ahensya. The question here was kung may na-experience na ba ever sa pag-request ng open data yung mga bagay na to. And a lot of you said yes, pinag-send muna kami ng letter ng request sa ahensya, ipinasa sa ibang opisina yung request, nakuha yung data pero naka-PDF or image. These aren't just your experiences. A lot of people share these experiences with you, and we'll also talk about that mamaya when we discuss open data. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng open data? Dapat ganito yung process natin when we talk about open data, and where can open data saan siya pwedeng pumasok para maremedyohan yung ganitong problema or yung ganitong mga experiences natin. The best talaga itong pinag-send muna ng letter of request. That's classic. That's classic Filipino governance technique. Yung pinag-send muna ng letter of request. And then last question before we go to the actual topic is about open source. So a lot of you, some of you answered na some of the things that you've heard is open source is not secure. It lacks support. It's only for techie people. It's hard to use. Mamaya titingnan natin yan. And yes, Totoo 'yon, sabi ni Ma'am Sharina, even within the LGU, kahit department to department magre-request pa kayo. Pareho lang naman kayong LGU. Even sa national government, 'di ba? Agency to agency magre-request kayo. You're all under the same national government. Personal experience ko dyan when I was still working with some DOST funded projects before, when we wanted to ask data from some of the other national government agencies also under DOST. We're also required to send letters of request. Pero we'll talk about that a bit more later. So yun yung about you. Yun yung mga sinagot nyo, and it's exciting, and I think it reflects then not just your experiences, probably experiences of other people, experiences of other hindi lang yung mga nasa LGU, but also private citizens, mga nasa academy, mga nasa researchers. It's something that is common among all of us. So with that, let's talk really about openness. So what does open mean? Last week, we also showed you this definition. It's open definition from, sabi ko nga, help curated by Open Knowledge Foundation. Ano ibig sabihin ng open? Anong ibig sabihin ng pagiging bukas? It means anyone can freely access, use, modify, and share for any purpose. Malaya kang makuha, gamitin, gamitin ayon sa pangangailangan mo, at ipamahagi sa iba. Kahit ano pa yung purpose mo. Subject at most to requirements that preserve provenance, or requirements na pini-preserve yung para malaman mo kung saan nanggaling yung data, kanino nagmula, at requirement na ini-ensure na bukas pa rin yung data after mo siyang gamitin. So parang pag mayroon akong data, pag naglabas ka ng data na open, malaya akong kunin yon, gamitin sa analysis ko, i-share sa iba yung analysis ko, pati na rin yung data na sinummarize ko. But at the same time, I should be required, or I should be, if I'm a good data user, I should preserve provenance. Ibig sabihin, sasabihin ko sa metadata ko na nanggaling sa inyo yung data, ito yung ginamit na type of analysis, ito yung ginamit na ito yung data source, sino yung gumawa, saan, kailan, and also kailangan i-preserve ko yung openness niya. Ibig sabihin, pag shinare ko yung summarized version ng data nyo, dapat as a good data user, open din yung data na yun, na pwede rin yung gamitin ng ibang tao to build on top on. So that's what it means to be open. We are free to access, use, modify, and share whatever it is that's open, making sure that we preserve provenance and openness. Mapapansin nyo, openness does not require a request. Wala sa open definition. Yung open means anyone can request data or request something. Openness does not require a request. And it's something that we're trying to remedy, or we're trying to change a bit yung mindset ng tao. When we talk about open data, dapat hindi yung unang iisipin natin ay request. And if people, if you experience people who say, open data kami, mag-request muna kayo, you can tell them upfront, that's not open data. I mean, you can't require me to request something and say that it's open data at the same time. I mean, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have those two things at the same time. They're counter to each other. You counter yung requirement of request with the essence of openness. Does open mean free then? Ibig sabihin ba nito libre? Yes, it means free, but it's, as I always say, and a lot of greater people before me have said, it's free as in freedom. It's not just free food, free t-shirt, free stuff. It's malaya, kalayaan. It's free as in kalayaan, free as in malaya. Yun yung ibig sabihin ng free. So kahit yung libre, di ba? Libre kasi is liberty. It's not really, libre in our sense na libre pagkain. It's libre liberty. freedom. It's about you getting specific freedoms when you use the data or when you use the software. Mamaya mas titingnan natin yan. So what are these freedoms? It's the freedom to use, it's the freedom to study, it's the freedom to modify, and the freedom to share. Based on the 4 essential freedoms of free software ng Free Software Foundation. So when you talk about open source, free and open source software, ito yung mga freedoms na meron ka. And similarly, when you talk about, free and open data, these are the same freedoms afforded to you by that data. The analogy I always use now, maraming beses na, is the free and open adobo. Most of us probably love adobo. Mga taga Luzon, especially, may hilig sa adobo. And the idea of the free and open adobo is that pag binigyan ka ng adobo ng isang tao, you are free. Meron kang kalayaan, malaya kang lagyan ng seasoning, palitan yung recipe, i-share yung adobo sa ibang tao, dagdagan ng asin, dagdagan ng toyo, or however you like your adobo. That's the free and open adobo. When you share that adobo to another person, that person also gets the same freedoms as you. And they can change the adobo to however it is they see fit or how it suits their taste. Imagine kung hindi yun pwede. Na pag binigyan ka ng adobo ng isang tao, yun lang yun. Wala ka nang pwedeng palitan. Yun na yun. And that's for someone who likes adobo. Diba? Medyo boring yun. Hindi ganun kasaya yung buhay pag ganun. So you can think about, freedom and openness in that sense. So let's talk about data, because hopefully we have some inkling of what openness is now. Ano ba yung pagiging bukas? So i-apply natin sa data yung pagiging bukas. Data is everywhere now. Kahit saan ka pumunta, mayroong data. It's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It's part of our lives now. Magbukas ka ng phone mo, data is being collected about you. Umorder ka ng pagkain sa Grab, you share your data with them. Umorder ka ng something sa Shopee or Lazada, data is being collected about you. You share something on Facebook, Twitter, social media. Those are data points about you that you are sharing. And data is everywhere. Our phones are basically sensors now. And wala pa yan dun sa mga mass collecting sensors tulad ng satellite imagery, remotely sensed data, drones, even CCTV images. So data is everywhere, and that's just one of the characteristics of data. You might hear a lot yung data is the new oil. I don't particularly subscribe to that. It's less oil and more parang coal, because it's messy. It's messy, and inherently it's aside from being meaningless, it's not energy efficient. It's not efficient. Data is not efficient. Tong buhay lang. If you've worked with large efficient, ang daming trabahong kailangang bunuin at ipasok sa data para maging useful siya. When people say data is the next oil, that was around 2012, mga ganun yung sinasabi ng tao. It's just to make it sexy. If you actually look at how much work is needed for you to use data, you won't think it. You'll second guess yung pagiging sexy ng data. But it's worth it, because aside from medyo negative stuff about it, if you learn how to harness, process data, you can make it meaningful. Pwede mo siyang i-extend to not just being coal. Data is something like energy. You can harness it, process it, and make it meaningful. And the trend should not be, gaano karaming data yung kaya mong makolekt or gaano karaming data yung kaya mong magamit. Similar to gaano karaming energy yung kaya mong magamit. It should be how much impact can you use? How much impact can you do? How much good can you do with a minimal amount of effort of data that you can? Parang energy din, di ba? How efficient energy is. Mas importante yun kaysa kung gaano karaming energy yung meron ka. I mean, for example, solar. We have a lot of solar energy, pero it doesn't mean we use 100% of it. So ang focus there is not to generate more solar energy. The focus there is to make sure that we are efficient in using that energy. In a sense, ganon yung approach natin with data dapat. We have raw data that we can structure, then we can process and make it into something efficient. Then going back to the sa answers nyo kanina, diba? It's information, it's used in decision making, observations, pieces of information. Sabi ko nga, it's a model of the real world. It represents kung ano nangyayari sa totoong buhay. And I'll borrow one of the best definitions, analogies of data that I've heard in one of my participants from South Cotabato when I was doing data literacy trainings there. And I forgot yung pangalan. I would have to ask kung sino siya ulit. That one of my participants there, sa LGU din ng South Cotabato, yung nagsabi nito. I asked the same question. What is data if you want to explain to a 5-year-old? Sabi niya, data are like the stars. They're all around us, even when we don't see them. When we do see them, they might seem incomprehensible. So, sure, lagi naman andyan yung stars. Kahit umaga, hindi lang natin nakikita. Tapos pag dumating yung gabi, makikita natin sila. And sometimes, pag tumingin tayo, incomprehensible, hindi natin maintindihan ano ba ibig sabihin yan. But if you look hard enough, diba, you can connect the dots, you can see patterns and constellations. And there, it makes sense. So, one of the better parang analogies about data that I've ever encountered. And it's something that you can think about then. Of course, when you talk about data, you can't not think about the value of it. Sabi ko nga, diba, that's why the entire data is the new oil thing. That's where it got its start. Kasi the data is valuable. A lot of things can happen because of data. And the work needed is ganun pa rin. Madami. Data does not automatically become wisdom. Data does not automatically become knowledge. Hindi dahil meron kang napakadaming data, meron ka na agad insight. That's not the case. You need to do work. You have data points that are seemingly messy. If you provide meaning to them, that's when you get information. And when you've gained enough information to know how to answer a question about using your data, saka ka nagkakaroon ng knowledge, ng kaalaman. With enough knowledge and experience, you gain insight. So, meron ng sinasabi ngayon sa'yo yung data mo. And yung last part dyan is wisdom. It's not past seeing, it's future looking. So, given this data, if you have the wisdom, paano mo magagamit yung data na to plan for something ahead? Ano yung sinasabi ng data na to about what's gonna happen 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Paano natin magagamit to create informed decisions? So data by itself, it's meaningless. Pag kayong magpaano sa big data, kung big data lang siya na walang anything else, that's close to meaningless. Para kang may lake. Yeah, data lake yung idea nila, di ba? Para may lake, tas hindi mo ginagamit yung resources niya. Napakaraming bagay doon pero hindi mo ginagamit. So, there's a lot of value in data, but there's also a lot of work needed to actually get that value from data. If you consider these statements, I have a box in front of me. The box is large and heavy. There's a door in front of the box which I can open. A light comes on when I open the door. The inside of the box is colder than the outside. There's usually food inside the box. The box is usually found in the kitchen, and there are usually things put on top of the box. And if I ask you, what's the box? Ano yung isasagot niyo? Walang ibang information. Wala ibang data points na binigay sa inyo. But sana, yun, bilis. Hopefully, karamihan sa inyo would answer a refrigerator. Ref yan. Fridge, if you're, social tayo, fridge. Ref yan. Refrigerator. Diba? Wala akong ibang sinabi sa inyo. Hindi ko sinabing ref to. I just gave you, these data points. But because sa context ng society natin, ng Pilipinas, we've learned enough from previous data to know na pag meron ako nitong mga pieces of information na to, data points na to, there's mostly only one conclusion that I can arrive at. And that is ref yan. Diba? It's amazing. Walang ibang sinabi sa inyo. Kahit nga siguro dito pa lang sa the inside of the box is colder than the outside, meron na kayo agad naisip, ref yan. And after that, all other statements just, amplify your belief na ref yun, or dinadagdagan lang niya yung pagiging sure nyo na ref yun. So that's a simple way to show you how data works. Imagine kung never pa tayo nakikita ng ref sa Pilipinas. Wala tayong konsepto ng refrigerator sa Pilipinas. Would you be able to answer this? Hindi, most probably. In the context of a society, an environment na never pang nagkaroon ng ref, meaningless tong mga statements na to. Wala silang, for them, wala yan. Meaningless yung statements na yan. Malay ko kung ano yan. Pero dahil sa context natin, merong meaning yung mga statements na to. Kasi may nakita na tayong ref before eh. I mean, lahat tayo siguro may ref. May meaning siya. So, hindi equal yung value and meaning ng data sa lahat ng tao. Iba-iba yan. It depends a lot also in the context of that society. Yeah. And I can't talk about the value of data without talking about its abuse or use and abuse. No, it's a resource. Sabi ko nga, oil, energy, people. And like any resource, it can be abused. Data can lie. Data lies a lot. In the hands of people who want to lie, they can use data to lie. Which is also one of the reasons why openness is important. Di ba? Ano yung way to counteract lying? It's being truthful, di ba? And being truthful is being open. Sabihin mo yung totoo. Kailangan may ebidensya ka kung ano yung totoo. Yeah. There's also a lot of ethical considerations when it comes to data. Especially big data, and also sa discussion kanina ni Sir Yung Wei, AI, machine learning and things like that. There are a lot of ethical considerations there related to consent, to bias, and privacy. May tingnan natin ng konti. Which is why dapat we think about data ethics every time. Basically, titingnan natin kung paano naapektuhan ng ginagawa natin sa data yung ibang tao. Then there's machine readability. Kanina nakita natin yung mga sagot natin. Basically, it's not just about being open by a computer. Hindi dahil openable siya ng computer, machine readable na siya. In the context of data, in the context of data work, dapat madali mong ma-extract, ma-process at ma-analyze yung data that they contain. Spreadsheets, awesome job. Spreadsheets are the most common example of machine-readable data. Lahat kayo, halos lahat yun yung sinagot. Unfortunately, PDFs are not. There are ways now to extract data from PDFs, pero hindi siya ganun kadali, hindi siya ganun ka-accurate. Imagine the scenario. Si Juan tsaka si Pedro, parehong magaling, parehong maalam. Binigyan sila ng task ng boss nila. Okay, I have this data from procuring entity A. For the past 10 years, ito yung procurement activities niya. Si Juan, binigyan ko ng PDF document nung data na yon. Si Pedro, binigyan ko ng same data pero naka-spreadsheet. Tapos sinabi ko sa kanila, okay, ito yung mga tanong, ito yung mga sagutan nyo. I need this as fast as you can. May bonus yung or something. May bonus yung makakuha. Sino kaya yung mauuna at sino yung mas maging accurate? Si Juan o si Pedro? And if you've if you've ever worked with data na naka-PDF, alam ko mararamdaman niyo yung nararamdaman ni Juan sa panahon na yan. Lalo na kung alam niyang si Pedro nakakuha ng naka-spreadsheet. Diba? Kung if ever na-experience niyo na sa buhay niyo mag-work with PDF documents to get analysis, medyo mas mahirap. So imagine that. That's why it's important for us to talk about machine readability. Sabi ko nga, machine readable data, all of it, tama naman kayo. Spreadsheet databases, CSVs are comma separated values. They're basically tables, ninuno ng spreadsheets. PDFs, unfortunately, hindi masyado. Ang basic test na pwede natin gawin is, pwede ka ba mag-summarize ng table sa PDF? Right now, probably hindi ganun kadali. So, probably hindi siya ganun ka-machine readable. Same with the Word document. Pag binigyan kita ng Word document, may table doon, kaya mo bang i-compute yung average dun sa tables na yon ng mabilisan? Pag hindi, maybe that's not machine readable. JSON is a JavaScript object notation. It's a machine readable format. It's the format that's used a lot by the web. It's machine readable. So if you're a developer, tech person, kilala mo yung JSON. Yun. So 38 of you na-experience na yung humingi ka ng data tapos hindi machine readable yung binigay sa'yo. So when we talk about open data, when we talk about machine readability, follow Drake. Tayo sa CSVs, ODE, and spreadsheet files. Classic machine readable formats. And don't be like that to Bernie. When someone asks you for open data, wag naman po nating bigyan ng PDF. Kung kaya nating magbigay ng spreadsheet, lalo na kung computational yung data na yun, or CSVs, tulungan natin yung mga nagre-request sa atin. And with that, let's talk about your open data. Let's talk about open data. First, ang laging iisipin, but then, we don't have resources for a data portal. Said 16 of you. Probably more now kasi chinek ko to last night pa eh. May mga sumagot pa kanina umaga. We don't have resources for a data portal. Paano yan? Hindi kami technical enough to create a data portal. You don't need it. Itong buhay lang. Minsan sales talk lang yan na kailangan nyo nun. Sometimes you don't need it. There's this approach to publishing data known as the 5-star open data. It was suggested by TBL, Tim Berners-Lee, inventor of the World Wide Web. It's a deployment scheme for open data. Stars are awarded to you according to the state of your open data. And ang maganda dito, kung kanina we discussed about the essence of openness, what does it mean to be open? This one is how do we operationalize that openness? Ano yung framework na gagamitin natin? Paano natin masasabi kung nasa ang level na tayo ng open data? And the 5-star open data approach is a good way to operationalize open data and to really talk and think about how can we move forward with opening up our data sets. And it's a very simple scheme. You have 5 stars. Each star has may key indicator siya if you're on that star already. The very first star is just make it available. Make it available in any format under an open license. Again, open license is a license that provides you yung 4 freedoms mo. You're free to access, use, modify, and share it. If you want to learn more about open licenses, you can go to Open Source Initiative. Meron silang list of open licenses there. So if you release even your PDFs, even your images, even your documents, if you release them, so long as they're under an open license, may 1 star ka na. And then if you want to move to a 2nd star, you make sure that it's structured machine-readable data. So instead of PDFs, ginawa mo na siyang Excel files, di ba? Nagre-release na tayo ng Excel file. So may 2 stars ka na. Magre-release ka lang ng Excel files, may 2 stars ka na. And the sweet spot para sa akin, the easiest, least amount of effort, greatest amount of impact, 3 stars. Yung middle ground na yan. release it in an open, non-proprietary format. Instead of Excel, which you need Microsoft to open properly, release it in a CSV, comma-separated value file. Kung wala namang macros yung spreadsheet mo, if it's just really raw data. Di ba? Release it in JSON, release it in .ods, open document spreadsheet formats, para pwede siyang buksan ng kahit sino without needing any proprietary solution or any proprietary software. Ba? 3 stars. The sweet spot. Sabi ko nga, i-make sure mo lang na nag-release ka ng CSV 3 stars na. And then the 4th and 5th stars are like icing on the cake. Gagawin mo na siyang network. It's going to be a network of data. It's going to be data on the web, not just in the web. Parang mas contextualized na yung data mo. They are identified by unique, resource identifiers, and pwede ka nang gumawa ng kwento about your data. So data portals, mga data portals natin may mga ganong capabilities na rin. So you can think about this when you're thinking about opening up your data, na hindi nyo kailangan yung sobrang high-tech or sobrang maraming resources for it. So let's talk a bit about open data in the Philippines. I agree I partially agree dun sa 57% na nagsabi na meron, because there are a lot of data in the Philippines. These are just some examples. You have data.gov.ph. You have OpenStat from PSA. You have the economic database from PIDS. PhilJeps releases open data. I'm not sure now, pero back then, you have the GeoPortal na medyo may, although not technically open, may data na sinishare. So maraming data sa Pilipinas if you know where to look. So there is partially open data, but it's not as good as yung probably iisipin natin or gusto nating open data. Merong isa ditong bagay na nawawala pero na hindi ko sinama, pero I'm pretty sure a lot of you are also familiar with. And that is FOI, the Freedom of Information na approach. And ano ba yung relationship ng open data at FOI? Chris has mentioned this before and I'm going to reiterate it. Ulitin ko lang. FOI is not open data. They're not the same thing. Hindi open data FOI. The mere fact that you have to request for data, it's already not open data. It's more reactive than proactive. Ibig sabihin, magre-release ka ng data pag may humingi or nagtanong, and you're not, just putting, data out there. So even though they have similar goals, they're not the same thing. And we should always remember that one, cannot and should not replace the other. Hindi dahil may FOI na tayo, pwede natin kalimutan yung open data. At the same time, hindi dahil may open data na tayo, pwede natin kalimutan yung FOI. These two are, complements. Pag pareho sila malakas, mas malakas tayong lahat. Parang ganun. So, don't be like Pam if you watch The Office. They're not the same thing. They're not the same thing. They have nuances. Mga pagkakaiba that make them more suitable sa isang bagay than the other. Again, think of this scenario. Under FOI, you need to submit a request, wait for the request to be approved, and then if it's granted, saka mo makuha yung data. Under an open data policy, if the data does not fall under, restrictions, protected data, so PIIs, personally identified information based on the DPA, constitutionally protected information based on national security, then you should be able to get the data directly, hopefully in machine-readable formats, without needing a request. Bakit to importante? In times of disasters. Nung pumutok yung Taal, nung start ng COVID, a few of my friends in the open mapping communities, we came together to map out yung mga possible areas na affected ng Taal. And mas mabilis namin siyang nagawa kasi open data yung gamit namin. Kahit yung mga hazard levels, If they're open data, mas madali mo siya makuha. At the snap of your finger, pag emergency, kailangan mo siya, andyan siya. But if you have to request for it, tapos na yung disaster, marami nang naapektuhan, nag-aantay ka pa rin na ma-approve yung request mo. And in life and death situations, in disaster situations, every second, every minute counts. And the ability to get the data, as you need it, when you need it, sobrang halaga niya. So for things like that, kailangan talaga natin yung open data policy. For things na for emergency purposes, na dapat bukas at alam ng mga tao, na hindi mo kailangang idaan sana sa FOI or idaan sa isa pang data request sa isang national government agency. Which is why our approach then sa Smart City has always been be open by default, and believe in FreeAsInFreedom. We advocate and lobby for an open data policy together with current, not just, but also together with the current FOI approach. And we want to raise awareness and introduce more people to the philosophy and advantages of open source. What do we mean by this? When you operationalize open by default, you start with the assumption that data funded by the people and government data should be open. So start with there. Everything is open muna. Tulad nung kanina. But there are exceptions, of course. From that rule, you apply exceptions on what data you need to protect. Sabi ko nga, information protected by the Constitution and statutes. So national security, personally identifiable information, mga bagay na sa batas talaga natin, hindi mo pwedeng ilabas. And then, of course, ethical considerations of data. Indigenous communities, sensitive information, like, naalala ko, one time, may naglabas ng parang mapa ng mga bahay na may COVID. That's hindi ethical yung consideration na yun. I mean, I know yung idea is to make the public aware kung saan yung possible hotspots or quarantine, but it could be used to have negative impacts sa mga tao, especially kung you can personally identified with that data. And also indigenous communities, you have to respect yung iba sa kanila ayaw nila kasi that's their right as indigenous communities. Ayaw nilang mamapa, ayaw nilang masama sa studies and things like that. Basically what I'm saying is it shouldn't be the other way around. It shouldn't be that you close all your data from the start and then yes, talin ng politicians. That's also something. It should be the other way around. Hindi pwedeng we close the data from the start and then we just find a way to open and share the data. Diba? Parang ganyan. Let's not do that. Let's not do that with Philippine data, please. Unahin natin yung openness and then find restrictions. But then you ask, but isn't open data dangerous to privacy and security? And yes, some of you actually answer that. And my answer there is no. We should talk about the data spectrum pagdating sa ganito eh. All data should not be open. I am a staunch advocate of open data, but even I believe that some data should not be open. Sabi ko nga, constitutionally protected data, na valid yung protection, na hindi ginawa lang, and of course ethical considerations. So there's this thing known as the data spectrum. There are data that need to be closed. Kahit naman yung kahit yung constitution natin respects that. May, di ba? May right ka not to answer questions related to national security. Even if you get subpoenaed by Congress as kung part may administrative protection against divulging information na related to national security, diba? There's privileges for that. But hindi ibig sabihin nun lahat pwede mo nang i-go under national security. Hindi naman yung SALN, hindi naman siguro national security question yung SALN, di ba? But it just means that yes, there should be data that are protected, and we should always respect the rights and privacy of our data actors. Meron kang internal access, meron kang shared, and there you have stuff na open talaga not everyone can use. And it's something na kailangan din nating tingnan. Not just dahil open data, open lahat, or dahil dapat protected yung protected na lahat. So it's a spectrum. It's something na hindi lang iisa, hindi siya binary. Hindi siya either closed or open ka lang. It's a spectrum. And that's where we talk about data ethics. And that's where ethics comes in. It's a branch, fairly new branch of data work, or ethics work, na yung ina-evaluate mo is yung data practices nyo. Paano kayo makaka-impact ng tao in your data collection, data sharing, and data use. 4 things that you should remember about ethics. It's not just about personal data. Anong ibig sabihin ko dito? Even public data needs ethical considerations. An example ko dyan, even the choice of making how you make data accessible, saan mo linalagay yung data mo, pwedeng maka-impact severely ng other people. So dito, if you make data accessible only online, in poorer areas na walang internet access and walang alternatives to access the data, hindi nila malalaman yung data na yun. Diba? They will be left out, and then you're basically increasing your existing inequalities. Kaya diba, kaya maganda yung requirement nga din sa atin, diba? I-post sa conspicuous places yung mga ibang documents, o kaya national circulation na newspapers. So that's a consideration that we should look at. It's not just about personal data. Even the data we make public, we have to make sure na accessible siya ng lahat. It isn't just about compliance with the law. There are lawful data activities that are not ethical. If you've heard of Cambridge Analytica, technically lawful, ethical gray area. Emotional contagion research. It's also a research on social media, wherein I think 650,000 people, hinati nila. One of them, pinakitaan lang nila ng positive things on social media. Another, all negative things, and tinignan nila yung difference. Yes, technically lawful, ethically gray area. And ang dami pang major ethical gray areas that we should be worried about. Yeah. It's also not just about how data is used. It's also about how we collect data. It's also about how we store data. So sometimes not collecting data about certain groups of people, although it's bad, but collecting them and then, just collecting data from them is even worse. Example ko dyan is, for example, if you're collecting disease data, HIV/AIDS, for example, not collecting the data is bad, but collecting it only for members of a certain community, such that when you actually look at the data, it frames it na parang sila lang yung meron nun, or sila yung primary causes nun. That's even worse. You open up your data to profiling and discrimination. And it's not just about restricting access to data. In fact, if you have an ethical approach to data, mas trustworthy ka. Mas open yung tao sa'yo. And I need to talk also about data bias, especially in the context of large data sets. It's a very big issue in data ethics, kasi our biases are reflected, propagated, and amplified with data, especially if you have large amounts of data. You can look for researches online, look for documentaries, coded bias, it's on Netflix, and things like that, that show na yung data, if it's data that learns, it only learns from yung data na i-feed mo. So kung may bias dun sa data na feed mo, may bias din yung output niya. And there's a lot of sources where bias can come from. You can have, framed survey questions. You can have, selective collection ng groupings. You can even have already underlying bias sa data sources mo. So always think about data bias when working with data. And in relation to that, data privacy and surveillance, people should know more about public algorithms, how public algorithms affect their lives, how data about them are being used, and also how data, especially large crowdsourced data, is being used by people for things like facial recognition, artificial intelligence. So it shouldn't be a black box. Alam dapat natin kung saan ginagamit yung data natin at paano siya ginagamit. So some challenges and barriers that we can see when working with data and open data are yun. Ang hilig natin sa PDFs instead of spreadsheets and CSVs. We sometimes equate FOI with open data. In relation to that, ang hilig din natin sa requests. It's something na sana wag natin masyadong gawin. We are prone to that. Mahilig tayo sa mga, request ka muna. Yeah. Yung data providers natin, sometimes, mas mahilig sila mag-release ng PDFs. Where's scanned PDF? Diba? Pinicturan, tapos ginawang PDF. So, doble yung trabaho, hirap ng trabaho mo. Yung PDF sana okay lang, pwede mo pang drag copy. Yan yung matindi. Pinicturan, iniscan, ginawang PDF, sinend sa'yo. Pinahirapan ka talaga. So sometimes that happens, and it's it's something that we can work on. I mean, it's something that we can work on. Hindi naman siya permanente. It's something that we all can work on. If we are all more aware, if we all put in the time, we can work on these things. Ba yung ginagawa natin na nagre-restrict tayo ng data and things like that. And yung combo breaker talaga. Yung wombo combo. Makakahanap ka, nagsasabi they practice open data. Then when you ask them, okay, available ba siya online? Sabihin sa'yo, hindi. Okay, saan ko siya pwede makuha? Sabihin sa'yo, mag-request ka muna. And after mo mag-request, ibibigay sa'yo PDF. So lahat ng hoops tinalunan mo, at the end, PDF pa rin yung nakuha mo. Pero sabi nila, open data sila. So, let's try to minimize that. So, siguro isipin nyo, then we'll just open our data. Diba? Kung yun yung magiging solusyon. And sabi nga natin, diba? Some of us believe open data will result in open government, and that opening, our data will automatically, yield benefits. But that's not the case. And that's not the case. It's a hard pill to swallow, but releasing data is not enough. Open data should not end with data release. In our projects in SmartCT, our goal is not simply to release data. No, we're not here to create data dumps, mga data portal na nag-hold ng data pero hindi naman ginagamit. To be honest, kailan yung last time nag-gamit kayo ng data portal ng government? Or kailan yung last time na may kilala kayong gumamit ng mga data sa data portal ng government? Diba? We're not here to create data dumps. We're not here to create just data portals. Any open data project should strive to spark conversation, facilitate communication, and most importantly, provide, disturb the status quo. So yun yung maganda sa open data. There's a lot of things na pwede mong makuha sa kanya. And sometimes I say na open data without users is no better than closed data. Kahit may open data ka, kung wala namang gumagamit, it's the same thing. Parang may closed data ka rin. So importante na may users tayo. But then, we don't even know if people want our data. Sabi ng iba sa atin. Hindi namin alam kung ano i-release namin kasi malay ba namin kung importante ito sa kanila, di ba? Malay ba namin? kung gusto nila to, baka nagsasayang lang kami ng oras. Those are valid concerns. But this is where, community development and the community building and co-development come in. We put people before systems. Sabi nga namin, it's not about apps. It's about people. You leverage the power of the people. Yung before, yung pinakita ni Chris, yung sa OpenStreetMap, diba? Crowdsourced mapping. Those are things na pwede natin gamitin. People know data about themselves. People know data about their communities. We don't have to come in and say, alam namin lahat. Because we don't. Most of the time, people know more than us, especially sa communities nila. So use that, leverage that, and build grassroots communities around open data and open source. Yung tipong, mamaya papakita ko ng example of how that works and the power of building communities. Yan. And take note lang, when I talk about co-creation, I'm not talking just about, focus group discussions, then consolidating ideas, getting the middle, quote unquote, middle ground. No, that's masyado siyang, it's too compromise. Co-creation is not solely about compromise. When you start your co-creation, it should be, sabi ko nga, inclusive, painfully inclusive. If it's not uncomfortable, you're not co-creating. Why? Kasi usually, sobrang harsh talaga ng differences in needs and wants and in power ng mga stakeholders nyo. You will always have stakeholders na mas malaki yung mawawala sa kanila pero mas konti yung influence versus malaki yung influence pero hindi naman ganun kalaki yung mawawala sa kanila. So you have to confront that. There's inherent power relations and inequalities always in society. So if you're not doing that, if it's not uncomfortable, you're not co-creating. You're just, helping create a compromise. But when you do compromises, yung mas influential lagi naman yung lamang. Kasi sila yung mas may influence, mas may power. So when you co-create, you acknowledge things like injustices, impacts nun, and try to make sure na yung shared point of view, hindi dahil napilitan yung isang counterpart kasi mas malakas yung influence ng isa. So that's co-creation. But then, paano naman kung walang i-release namin yung data, wala namang skills yung namin, yung mga tao, and they might even misuse it tulad ng sinabi ko kanina. And yan yung main considerations actually, karamihan. This is where data literacy and data culture come in. And dito papasok yung third day natin. We'll talk more about data literacy then, but what I can tell you about data literacy is, it's about building culture. It's about building an environment. It involves not just skills, but also the knowledge, attitudes, and social structures. It's not about just skills, diba? You empower people. You give them confidence. Na kahit yung maralita, kayang gumamit ng data. Kahit yung tricycle driver, kayang gumamit ng data. Hindi monopolized yung data ng certain organization or certain groups of people lang. So that's the worst na pwede nating gawin, na i-monopolize natin yung data. The field of data is far too important. It needs to be inclusive. But no single person, department, or organization should have a monopoly on data. And there's no shortcuts. Building open data culture is a long and arduous process, and mahirap talaga, promise. But it's worth it. Both the journey and destination is worth it. Before I complete this part, sorry, I told you mahaba to. Be wary of open washing. Similar to greenwashing and whitewashing. It's when people talk about openness pero hindi naman openness talaga yung sinasabi nila. Kaya ako sinabi kanina yung inuna ko talaga yung definition of open. Kasi if it doesn't fit there, it's probably not open. They're probably just open washing it. Kasi malaki yung usefulness at value ng open data. Sometimes people just, utilize open data for not so good things. So be wary of that, of open washing. Similar dun sa idea ng greenwashing, di ba? corporations, meron silang parang mga green alternatives, but in reality, wala ring effect yon sa environment, sa kagandahan ng environment. Same thing. Be wary of that now. So, yeah, smart washing din. You know? People talk about being smart, but it's not really about being smart. So yun. Where can we start before I end this part? Because we also have a second part na mas maikli, I promise. Mas maikli yung second part. Where can we start? We provide some solutions and services, Smart City. We have existing projects that we try to utilize to encourage communication, to encourage openness. We have our assessment tool that you've tried. We also have assessment research. Kung makikita nyo, assessment talaga yung simula ng lahat eh. Kasi there's no cookie cutter solution. Every LGU is different. Iba yung data na meron sila, iba yung needs nila, iba yung capacity nila. So if you go in with the solution agad, you're a hammer looking for a nail. You're a solution looking for a problem. Malay mo, hindi naman hammer yung kailangan nila, screwdriver pala. Diba? So hindi tayo ganun. I mean, we try as much as possible not to be like that. We always start with an assessment and see kung ano yung best approach to solve problems in an LGU. So we have data literacy, events, disasters governance, OpenGeospatial for climate and disasters governance, and mga state of open data and Philippine local governments inventory and catalog of smart LGUs. So those are some of the things na we're focusing on open data, and we would like, if you are interested, to work with us as well. So apologies for the very long part. Tapos na yung part na yun finally. Mas maikli. I also have a second part pa talking about open source, pero mas maikli, promise. So yeah, I give the floor back to maraming salamat.